So this happened yesterday, and I'm still pretty shaken up. Just for some backstory, I'm a 25-year-old female, and my boyfriend and I both have jobs where we can work from home and in an office. I was extremely tired yesterday morning, so I decided to work from home as my boyfriend went into the office. So I was alone all day with just my dog and cat at home with me. The day was normal as any other workday from home that I've taken until about 1:30 p.m. This is where things took a turn. I had just hopped into a work meeting when my doorbell rang. We have one of those Ring doorbells with a camera, and it notifies my boyfriend's phone that someone's at the door. I texted my boyfriend, and I asked if he could check who it was, and he said it was an older man who looked kind of sketchy and did not answer the door. So I ignore the door and go back to my meeting. 20 minutes later, I'm done with my meeting and I decided to check my phone. I always keep my phone on Do Not Disturb while I'm working, and as soon as I checked it, I noticed all of the calls and texts that I'd missed from my boyfriend. Panicked, I immediately called him back and he frantically asked me why I haven't been answering. I told him I was in a work meeting and he tells me to look out the window as the man hasn't left our property yet. I very quietly walk over to the front windows of our house and peek out. And sure enough, the man's in our driveway. He had parked his old beat-up truck next to our car in our driveway, and he was looking back and forth very sketchily. He had on dirty jeans and a dirty gray tank top. I immediately run back to our bedroom, and at this point, my heart is pounding in my chest. I tried to comfort myself by just saying that maybe he had the wrong house, but no. The man began looking through our windows trying to see inside, and he proceeded to try and open our back gate, which was locked. As I mentioned earlier, I have a large dog, and at this point, my dog is snapping and growling at the front door. As I still had my boyfriend on the phone, and he was actively watching the man on the camera app on his phone, I asked him what I should do since I was in full panic mode and completely alone. "Call 911, he firmly said. I did as he said, and with shaky hands I called. While I waited for the police to arrive, I texted my mom to let her know of the situation, and she immediately dropped what she was doing and said she was on her way. The man was still snooping around the house and looking through our windows. At this point, I had no idea what his intentions were, but by the looks of it, they didn't seem good, and I was really afraid he would see me. As soon as the man saw the police coming down the road, he hopped in his truck and sped off. I ran outside to the officer, and at this point, my mom had arrived as well. In tears, I explained what happened, and thankfully my mom got the man's license plate number. The police took his license plate number as well as description, and they told me they'd be on lookout for him. I know this may not seem as scary as some of the other stories here, but when you're alone and there's a man looking through your windows and not leaving your property, you have no idea what his intentions are, and it's absolutely terrifying. I wasn't able to sleep last night because I was so terrified, thinking he would come back to try and finish what he started. I'm hoping the police call me with an update since we had the license plate number. And if they do, I will provide an update. And to the strange man who wouldn't leave my property, please don't come back again. For context, I'm a girl, and the story took place when I was 18 years old. At the time, I was living with my father, but he was working long shifts away from home, so I spent a lot of time alone. One day I was home alone and trying to study in my bedroom. It was around 7 p.m. and dark outside. I was used to studying alone like this with my headphones on. My bedroom was at the back of the house facing the garden, which has a gate at the back leading to a large field. It wasn't unusual to get distracted by the occasional noise at night because the fields were really popular with dog walkers. This time though, it was different. I was trying to focus on my homework when a bright light came streaming through the window. I peeked out expecting to see a person and their dog, but I couldn't locate the source of the light. I went back to what I was doing, assuming it was someone walking who'd accidentally shone the light at my window. The next night it happens again. A bright light through my window, specifically with no dog walker in sight. This time I was frustrated, and I questioned if it could be the same person being creepy or trying to see into my room as I kept the curtains open. I spent longer looking out the window this time, trying to figure out the source of the light. I soon realized it was coming from somewhere close. It was coming from my own garden, and the gate connecting to the fields seemed to be open. My heart started beating really fast, and I didn't know what to do. I quickly texted my dad, saying that I thought someone was in the garden. He told me to make sure that all of the doors were locked, and that he'd be home as soon as he could. I snuck down the stairs as quietly as possible, not wanting whoever was outside to know I was there. I checked the front door, and thank God it was locked. I crept to the back door facing the garden, and just as I was about to check it, I then saw the handle going down, like someone was trying to open the door. Thankfully that door was locked too, but they did try a few times to open it. By this point, I was absolutely terrified and shaking. I heard them try and pull at the kitchen window as well, but they had no luck. I tried to get a look at the person, but all I could tell was that they were white and tall. It was too dark to pick out any features. They seemed to be getting frustrated now, and then started banging at the window like they wanted to force it to break or open. I looked towards the front of the house, and my dad's car still wasn't there, and I was getting worried. Then by some miracle, I heard my neighbor's back door open and their large dog barking loudly. They must have noticed the stranger and then let out their dogs to scare them away. And it worked. I haven't seen them around again. I've never been so thankful for my neighbor's loud dogs before, and now I always check the doors are locked, even more than I used to. This happened when I was 17. I'm 22 now, and still thinking about it haunts me to this day. I was at my house on a Friday night. My mother was out of town for the weekend visiting some friends, so I had the house all to myself for the weekend. That night, I invited my friend Dan over for the night, and we decided to watch a scary movie. We got some snacks and soda, and we then turned on my favorite horror movie of all time, which is Drag Me to Hell. The one where that loan officer denies an old woman's request for an extension on her mortgage, and she then gets a curse put on her, where she has to break it within 3 days, or she'll get literally dragged to hell. Anyways, about an hour into the movie, me and Dan were having a good time and laughing at random shit in the movie. I paused the movie because I had to go to the bathroom, and just as I walked into the bathroom, I saw out the window that the sky looked green. I knew that there was going to be a storm, but I didn't pay attention to it. So I did my business, washed up, and went to continue the movie. Well, after the movie was over, me and Dan got an alert on our phones. The alert said that there was going to be a tornado warning until 7:45 p.m. and to seek shelter now, and that the threat level was really extreme. We immediately left the house to get to the storm shelter in the trailer park. Yeah, I lived in a trailer park at the time, so we had to evacuate the trailer. Just as we got to the storm shelter, that was when all of the sirens started to go off and the wind started to get violent. The owner of the trailer park unlocked the shelter, and us and everyone else in the trailer park got inside of it. We went down to the basement and all huddled. About 10 minutes later, the power went out, and we could all hear the wind getting really violent, and what sounded like a freight train shook the whole building. It shook so violently that I actually thought it was going to collapse. I started crying, and I thought we were going to die. Me, Dan, and everyone else in the shelter started freaking out. There were 5 loud crashing sounds that came from outside. I was so terrified that I felt like I was going to shit myself. We then heard a loud roar of the tornado's wind from outside through the structure of the building. Then about 10 minutes of noise later, it stopped. We were then given the all clear. We all left the shelter, and from the damage we all saw, I couldn't believe it. To say the damage was crazy is an understatement. There were a few cars flipped upside down, a couple of trees were uprooted, and 3 houses were damaged. 2 others were completely leveled, and another house had a car crash into it. Me and Dan hugged each other tightly while crying hysterically, because we were really glad to be alive. We were probably doing this for about 15 minutes. Then we walked back to my house. Luckily, all it had was just a little bit of side damage. Dan also lived in the trailer park at the time. Dan's mom and sister said when they got back to their house, there was damage to the roof. I invited Dan to spend the night at my house tonight. He agreed since he was still terrified. His mom and sister were cool with it too. I know this isn't the typical story with a creeper, but it was still terrifying, and I will never forget that day.
When I was around 18, I had gotten let go from my job as a part-time retail associate in Iowa City, Iowa. The reason for my termination was because the company was going bankrupt and couldn't afford to pay their employees. At the time, my parents made me pay rent and other expenses, and because I no longer had a job, I had to find a new one. Searching for a job was a hassle, and it didn't help that there weren't many jobs that were part-time. On top of that, I was also a part-time college student, which only added to the stress. Weeks had passed, and I still hadn't found myself a stable job. However, that was until one of my friends had called me, wondering if I could watch his dog as he was going on vacation that week. The reason he chose me was because the sitter who originally watched his dog had recently moved 3 states away and he couldn't find anyone else. The pay was $600 for 3 days, which was still enough to get by, but meant I would still have to find another job soon. Desperate for pretty much any pay, I accepted his offer and agreed to look after his dog. His dog's name was Jem. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd with the personality of a teddy bear. Of course I was intrigued. I had arrived to his house where he had left a list of all the rules. Feed her at this time, let her out every 2 hours, give her walks, etc. Basically the usual responsibilities when owning any dog. Caring for a dog may seem easy, but it gets stressful after a while when you constantly have to let them out. The first night went smoothly with no accidents and had gotten done every rule on the list. However, that was until the second night of dog sitting, where something happened that would completely shock me. For some context, it was around 8 or 9 p.m. I had ordered some food and was watching a movie with Jem laying next to me. At one point during the movie, she sits up and perks her ears while tilting her head, as if she saw or heard something. The house was next to somewhat of a wooded area, so I had figured it was possibly a squirrel or some other critter. Soon after though, she started looking around and began barking in the direction of the hallway. Almost immediately, she jumps down from the couch and runs to the hall. At this point, I started to get a little worried as I didn't know what she could possibly be barking at. Curious, I follow her and see that she's barking at the door that led into the basement. I didn't even dream of opening that door and instead pulled her away. However, she wouldn't comply and pushed the door open, fleeing down the stairs. Darkness filled the basement, and so I get out my phone to help light my way down. This was before Apple had built-in flashlights, so I used my screen to illuminate whatever was down there. After feeling around for it, I find the light switch and see Jem sitting by a small closet door. This was one of those closet doors with the see-through ridges, so I was able to slightly see inside. Ever so carefully, I approached the door and pulled Jem away, but not before taking a quick look inside. Staring back at me was an eye. Pretending not to notice, I drag her out of there and run to the living room to call the police. I tried my absolute best to whisper into the mouthpiece as I didn't want to make any noise. However, even with me being so quiet, it didn't help as Jem was still barking. As I'm on the phone with the operator, I begin to hear someone coming up the wooden steps from the basement. The person slowly knocks, as if it were a way to frighten me even more. All the while, Jem was barking her head off, trying to break down the basement door. The sounds of sirens being heard in the distance was music to my ears as they drew closer. All the while, I hear the person down there start running down the stairs and hearing a door open. Fortunately, police were fast to respond as they arrived to the house in minutes. As it turns out, police had found what appeared to be some secret room in the basement. Me, nor my friend, had any acknowledgement of this room and didn't even know what it was for. Our best guess was that it was some sort of wine cellar that was used back then. My friend paid me extra for the trouble, and I never dog-sat for him again. I'm not sure if police ever found the man, or the possibility that he's still out there somewhere. The scariest part about this is that there was reason to believe the man had been hiding in that room for months. Inside were stolen items, beer cans, food, and even a sleeping bag. My friend had since moved cities recently as him and his family couldn't shake off the paranoia. This just goes to show you that you can't even enjoy the safety and comfort of your own home. When I was about 15, my family and I moved into a large house. It was a relatively new home with 3 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a garage, and even a large basement. Both of my parents were in the upper medical industry and worked several hours of the week. This meant that I would be home alone for the majority of the time while they were gone. I love staying alone as I like to think of myself as mature and adult-like. At the time, we lived in somewhat of a rural area of Knoxville, Tennessee. Those who have been to or live in Knoxville will probably relate to what I'm talking about. While it was a nice city, the crime rate was high, and during this story, I got a taste of what that looks like. One evening, I had come home from school and my parents were at work. Unfortunately, this was around the time where COVID was still rampant, so my parents had to work extra. 15-year-old me immediately hops onto Call of Duty to cure my boredom. I play some matches for a few hours or so before going up to my room and taking a nap. I'd say I slept for a good 2 hours or so before I awoke to a noise from the kitchen. Looking back, it kinda sounded like a clanking noise you'd hear when moving stuff around. I wake up and take a look at my clock. It was around 7 p.m. I was genuinely annoyed from this noise and put on my slides and went downstairs to see what it was. I ever so slowly turned the corner and what I saw chilled me to the bone. There, in the kitchen, was a woman going through our fridge. She had her back toward me, so she couldn't see me or know that I was there. To provide a little more detail, she was not at all a pleasant-looking woman. She looked homeless, and looking back, I'm pretty sure she was. She wore torn shorts, a tank top, and some sort of wristband. I put my hands over my mouth and slowly went back upstairs. As much as I wanted and needed to call the police, I couldn't as the only home phone we had was near the kitchen. Instead, I thought of another idea. My parents were friends with the neighbors from down the road, so I'd figured I'd go there and call the police. Now, I obviously couldn't have gone through the front door, so I did what anyone else would do. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out while gathering up the courage to fall. When I finally did, I hit the ground with only a sprained ankle and made my way over to the neighbors where I explained what happened. They, of course, instantly let me in to use their phone to call 911. In the meantime, they made a call to the hospital my parents worked at. The police ended up coming a lot faster than I thought and entered my house. Within a minute, they came out with an old, tired, lanky woman in handcuffs. However, she didn't try to get away or resist arrest. She seemed somewhat neutral about it, as if she had accepted her defeat. As it turns out, my theory was correct after all. She was a dangerous homeless woman who had broken into several homes in the area. My parents had come home soon after, where they had spoke with the police, where they then recommended we get cameras. And that's exactly what we did. The next day, my dad went out and installed a high-tech security system around the house. Surprisingly enough, the story didn't end there. It wasn't until a few nights ago where I had brought up the incident to my mom and asked if she remembered about it. Her eyes went wide with this look of fear and worry. When I asked what the matter was, she sat me down, held my hands, and said she was going to tell me something I didn't know. When her and my dad were talking to the cops that day, the cops had mentioned something that would shock them to their core. When they had entered my house, they had found a woman standing outside of my bedroom door. In her hand was one of our kitchen knives that she appeared to have been gripping tightly. Let's just say that if I hadn't jumped out of my window, things probably wouldn't have ended well for me. Thankfully, we hadn't had any break-ins as of today, and I hope it stays that way. For a bit of context, this happened to me about a week ago in the middle of the night. I'm a 27-year-old male and live alone in a small one-bedroom house in our rural area of Idaho. I was never the type to enjoy cities, nor was I the type to be around a lot of people. I just wanted a nice and quiet life, which is why I chose Idaho. Just this past week, I experienced something while home alone that I just had to write about. It was around 8 p.m. and I was at home cleaning the house when I hear my washing machine ring, letting me know that my clothes were done. My washer and dryer are both located in the basement of my home, so I went down there while turning on the light when I noticed something odd. One of the shelves that had been up was now face down with tons of my tools scattered around the floor. This was strange as it was pretty sturdy. Why I didn't hear it fall over, I don't know, but I stand it back up and tend to my laundry. I take out my clothes and put them into the dryer, and the second I do, the shelf from behind me falls over and creates a loud crash. I instantly turn around to face the direction of where the shelf had fallen, and there, standing next to it, was a tall, lanky man with a disturbing grin. He wore a white shirt, baggy pants, and just simply looked dead inside, as if he were extremely tired. I wasn't sure what it was, but something about this man really creeped me out, and not to mention that he kinda looked like L from Death Note. The minute I laid eyes on him, I let out a, "Who the hell are you?" in a short, scared, angry tone. He gave no response and just kind of stood there looking at me, staring into my soul. Figuring he might have been in the possession of drugs, I calmly asked him if he needed help or was lost. Even with my calm approach, he still didn't talk or even move. Not knowing what to do, I called police and told them my situation. They said they'd send someone over, but that it could take a while due to extreme weather conditions. After I had hung up, the man had still been staring at me with his baggy eyes doing seemingly nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he simply turned around and walked back up the stairs and out the back door. I of course followed him, and he kept walking away from my house, disappearing into the night. There aren't any houses or other forms of civilization for a few miles, so I was confused as to who he was or how he got here. He hasn't been back since, and although it was a pretty creepy experience, I'm glad he's now gone.
I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and he said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived yet. So I just told him, "Yeah, sure. Whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had a green and purple shirt with bold stripes, kind of like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went upstairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typically girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at the exact same moment and said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here yet, and was going on and on about how unreliable she was. And then my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that?" I said, he said he was here to read the gas meters. Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my mouth protesting. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s. And obviously, we weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline. Then my ever so resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called out loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters. He's upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of that house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents got home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors along with the windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some random guy inside, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing, with the same MO. She was home alone, and the authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. It turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with our family after that. Our parents were definitely mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't let us leave home alone for a while. They ended up finding that girl. Apparently, she'd been held for a few days, then burned alive. They never caught that man, but fear not. He appeared to be in his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action.